Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's Thursday. Let's see, what am I going to do today? Oh, yeah. United States of America versus Joe Biggs et al. Day 42. I'll tell you, what's a long...
You think you'll stop by the courthouse today, maybe?
Well, if I don't, maybe nobody will notice, My co-counsel, Dan Hall, is handling today's witness. And so given the pace of proceedings, it's unlikely we'll get through more than one witness. I think after... I think we're on the 17th witness. Now, when I say day 42 of trial, 11 of those days were jury selection days. So we've had 30 or 31 days of evidence. We're on our 17th witness. The longest witness took 8 days. There were days where we got through a couple people briefly, but those days are few and far between. So you might wonder, those of you who are not lawyers, what does a lawyer do during a long trial to pass the time? When it's, Immanuel Kant once famously asked whether we were in time or time was in us. Right now, all I know is I'm trapped in this never-ending trial.
We're going deep on a Thursday morning. Good Lord.
Never-ending trial. One witness after another, one question, one objection. We've got to argue this. I don't even know how many exhibits there are. You've got like exhibit number 949A, number 949AX, depending on what special effect you're applying. Well, I'll tell you how I pass the time. I've struck it up with U.S. Marshals. So U.S. Marshals have been brought in to attend to these proceedings, and they come from around the country, and they stay for 3-week bids, and so we've cycled through a few sets. Some guys re-up for a second tour in the killing fields of Washington, D.C., and you get to know them. Now, I don't want to mention any names because for all I know, they'll get in trouble for consorting with the enemy. But we have sidebars. You remember sidebars. That's where in a small trial, all the lawyers go running up to the bench and have a whispered discussion with the judge so that the jury won't hear it. Well, you can't quite do that with whatever 12 or 15 lawyers as there are in this case. So we each have our own telephone, and it's got a little thing on it so when you want to talk, you can press in. And so we all sit at our tables with the telephone and talk to the judge while a white noise machine plays in the courthouse. And, it's probably annoying for those in the gallery wondering what the hell's going on. So we've started keeping track of how many sidebars there are per day. And when we come in the morning, we all put our numbers down, and we're not betting financially, but we're placing bets on it. So yesterday, a certain marshal from another part of the country said there'd be 8. I said there'd be 15. No, I said there'd be 14. When we got to 16 sidebars toward the end of the day, I walked by him and I said, "How does it feel to be double loser?"
That's nuts, man.
Well,
have you ever been involved in a case that had this many sidebars?
Maybe. I mean, a good Jim Nugent, a friend of the show, and I think you've met Jim. He likes to say that my cases always run long because I'd argue with my own shadow. So I mean, it may be, but there have been an extraordinary number of sidebars. There are an extraordinary number of lawyers, and the issues are extraordinarily contentious. Story in the New York Times yesterday. I see Mike's got it up. If you want to read that story, you get a sense of how unusual this conspiracy case is, and how difficult it is for the government. Having said that, it's a DC jury rather, and people travel from around the country to disrupt these people's home, and I'm not sure how sympathetic they'll be to the claims that we have to make. Hopefully, we'll get to make them sometime between now and the end of the world, or mid-April, whichever comes first.
This is a great article, though. So for any of you out there listening, not watching live or not viewing the stream after the fact, it's a New York Times article entitled "Prosecution's Witness at Proud Boys Trial Shows Complexities of the Case." And the subheading there is Jeremy Bertino, a former Proud Boy, provided some of the government's best evidence so far, but he also offered an unusual description of a criminal conspiracy. This is written by, I think, Alan Fuhrer, and perhaps co-written, I can't remember if there's another, Zach Montag. I'm afraid to scroll too far down on here for fear of getting the sign up, you have to be a member, sign up.
Yeah.
But great article. Norm, you and I shared a couple of moments before the stream yesterday where we actually talked about this in particular, this aspect of the case. So I'm happy to see the New York Times reporting on this. And I'd love to see, I don't know what the status of Brandy Buckman is, just for those watching and listening and remembering me showering her with praise several weeks ago for her coverage of basically becoming a Twitter version of a trial transcript in real time. She was let go from the Daily Kos. There's a number of people let go as I think part of a broader downsizing, but still they selected her in and among her peers to let go. Please reach out to her on Twitter, show her your support. I'm not sure what her plans are moving forward, but we very much appreciate her being one of the first people on the ground to really cover the early parts of this trial. So Brandy, if you hear this or see this, thank you very much.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I hope, I mean, this, so an illustration of the legal or the logical fallacy known as post hoc ergo proctor hoc is at play here. Did she lose her position at the Daily Kos because we called her out for praise? Well, we did that before she lost her position. Did that cause that? Of course it didn't. We don't have that kind of clout, at least not yet. We're working on that. So tomorrow we're off trial and long weekend coming. But I will not be left without entertainment here in DC because I'm going to go to CPAC tomorrow.
Hey,
I have never been to a political event of this sort, much less CPAC. And funny story, I don't you don't know this unless I've mentioned it here before. But a couple of years ago, I was approached and asked whether I'd consider running for the United States Senate, and it was. From a group of people who had access to funds and were prepared to put up some serious money to finance my campaign. And I chuckled and I said, "Are you out of your mind?" I mean, I certainly am. And what kind of hope do you think I'd have against Richard Blumenthal in Connecticut, in the bluest of all blue states? And they said, "Look, you don't have to win. You just have to give him a good fight. We know you could do that." So I called, or I didn't call, I texted the person who was instrumental in that campaign. And I said, am I going to see you at CPAC this weekend? And this person's response was, those people are all crazy. So I figure I'll fit right in. But I'm looking forward to going. I won't be there today, obviously. But tomorrow I think I'll have an opportunity to hear Vivek Ramaswamy. I'm looking forward to that. Steve Bannon is going to talk, which I think is sort of interesting. I don't know if he'll construe this as his farewell address prior to going to prison. I know he thinks he's got great odds for success on appeal. I hope he does. But it seems like a who's who of people on the right. And I'm hoping there'll be interesting booths and books and articles and paraphernalia for sale. And I'll report to you on what I see there, because I certainly think that if as we approach 2024, obviously the Republican Party is in turmoil, and people who want to make a bid for that party's nomination, I suspect, will appear at CPAC. I know that none other than the Donald himself gives the last address of the event on Saturday afternoon. I suspect I'll stick around for that, unless I have been abducted by space aliens and trolled away. But check out this day. I'm looking at, I think this is Thursday. I'm not sure that I'm so interested in what's Yiddish for judicial activism. I don't know even what that means. But at 2:40, there's Vivek Ramaswamy, and these are short speeches. Those of you who do public speaking for a living in one form or another realize how little time these people have been given. So Ramaswamy's got 25 minutes. And then I don't know if this is a typo. They've given Bannon 5 minutes. That to me,
I think it's 20 right here.
It says 3:05 to 3:10 p.m.
You're looking at the one above it. So Vivek Ramaswamy is at.
Oh, I see. Okay, great, got it.
And Steve Bannon is 4 to 4:20.
So
I think that's a really good back to back. I mean, you've got Nigel Farage as well, who will be speaking, and I'm always interested in what Nigel has to say.
Yeah, no, I'm very much looking forward to this threesome. They have Bolsonaro, and a report from Central America or Latin America coming up, I think, the following day. So, it should be interesting. Although, as you've just seen, given my inability to even understand how to read the agenda, odds are I'll just get there, get lost, have a hamburger, come home, and return to my room.
Well, your real job is to recruit some guests for the stream here. Maybe have someone call in. Take your laptop, take your mic, and maybe you just say, "Hey, Mike, I've got 20 minutes with Vivek Ramaswamy at noon. We're gonna do it." And then
All
we
right,
just
I'll bring it along. If you're around, we'll do it. I mean, and James O'Keefe will be there now, no
oh, that'd
longer
be
with
awesome.
Project Veritas, but now scheduled as a guerrilla journalist. So I'll see if I can meet him. We'll see. We'll
That'd
see.
be a lot of fun. I've got Saturdays lined up on the screen here. So there's James O'Keefe Saturday. They've given him only 15 minutes. I love how they call him a guerrilla journalist. That's funny. So we've got, where is Trump? Michael Knowles is there.
Oh, really? Where's that? Yeah, Michael
This is
knows from the Daily Wire.
Yep,
Yeah.
Saturday, 10:45 a.m.
Hmm,
And then I'm thinking Mark Levin will be there on Saturday,
hmm.
12:25. Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch, another good one. Then you've got some of the bigger names: Mike Lindell, Tulsi Gabbard. There's Bolsonaro there
Hmm.
at 2:05. Lauren Boebert, and let's see,
I
where's
think that Donald is the very end of the day. Yeah, there he is.
Yep, they've given him an entire hour. So you know
Well,
that's what you
uh,
get when you're Trump.
Trump, Trump, Trump. Well, we'll see. I have no idea how I will react to it. I don't go to events in general. Many years ago, I lucked into. I was invited to be a speaker at a Mensa convention, which I thought was tremendously hysterical because realistically I don't know if I could get into Mensa if I had to take the test, but there I was. And then I went well enough that next year I was a keynote speaker at one of their annual meetings, and so for a number of years I went to them, and it was fun because what you found was there was a collection of people from all over the country, maybe the world, and they were gathered together because they were all idiosyncratically intelligent, and they had events scheduled that was like a college campus, sort of like the Hey on Why Book Festival. That's one of the great treats in life if you ever get a chance to go, where people come. They come because they're interested in ideas, and you have different booths and events set up, and it's like being in college, having a college catalog all over again. You look and you say, "Wow, that looks cool," and you go. And if you don't like, you leave and you go to the next thing. So I will be sure to report if we
I
don't.
guess the question is, Lawyer Will going to be there? You guys could pal around together. Lawyer Will is in the chat today.
Yeah, lawyer. Well, so it's like 15 minutes out of town in Maryland at some hotel resort area. So we've met, we've dined. I'll see you there, big guy. Hubba hubba. That's of course assuming the world doesn't tumble into World War III. In which case we might all be incinerated. I don't know. I don't know what to make of Ukraine, China, and emerging global conflict. You look back at the world on the cusp of World War I or on the cusp of World War II, you see regional tensions, you see attempts to expand influence, you see perceptions and calculations and then miscalculations of other countries' intentions. And before you know it, there are embargoes, there's exchange of arms, there's conflict, and then there's alliances, and then there's a global war, while people sort out again global influence. Are we on the cusp of such a thing? I am not feeling obliged to stake my welfare on what happens in Ukraine. And when I see American officials pledging billions of dollars in support for Ukraine, when I see efforts made to get Ukraine into NATO, such that NATO would be required to come to its defense against Russia, when I see China and Russia tap dancing into one another's arms, and China seeking to expand its influence around the globe, and when I see suggestions that the United States interests are involved in this conflict and that we need to take a position, I begin to hear an invitation to something like a civil war, or not a civil war, a world war. And I'm just not feeling it. And
Yeah,
it
it's
makes me wonder whether I'm Neville Chamberlain, in appeasement with Hitler. But I just don't see how the West's interest, how the interest of my family, my children, my grandchildren are bound up in a bloody conflict over what happens in Ukraine. When I grew up, it was part of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapsed, it broke away. Russia, in the form of Vladimir Putin, has certain ambitions, territorial ambitions, that it seeks to satisfy by incorporating Ukraine into itself, as it were. Ukraine wants to resist in the name of autonomy. Well, okay, that's about as interesting to me as my next door neighbors fighting over who's going to control the channel changer. Are we going to watch ballet or a sporting event on the television? I want them sorting it out without my being required to get armed and enter the fray. I'm just not feeling it, Mike.
Yeah, it feels like Ukraine is being hazed for entry into NATO. And and I know that sounds really trite or reductive, but ultimately you can trace a lot of this stuff back, more than a decade, as Ukraine began to its governance began to change hands, and you see the involvement of U.S. intelligence assets, inspiring color revolutions, changing of the guard there, and Russia. There's Martyr Made podcast did an excellent job at the beginning of all this. Daryl Cooper is the gentleman's name, at discussing the history that you briefly went into there, Norm, about the rise of the USSR, the global tensions during the Cold War, the subsequent fall of the USSR, and what became of that Eastern Bloc region thereafter. It's an extremely exploitative history when you dive in, but ultimately what we're looking at from my vantage is the US's preoccupation with the expansion of NATO. And I think I've said this before on a stream. What's troubling to me is that what our administration and what uh, uh, Volodymyr Zelensky is asking us to do is effectively um, nullify Russia's interest in maintaining its own sovereignty and autonomy, right? And one could say, well, Russia's the one invading, expanding, etc. Sure, and that would be a very dim and limited view of history if we were to look at it territorially. What's clear is that NATO has expanded beyond its scope or its purview from what we have promised the world and promised ourselves. And to the extent this is an economic initiative, it appears to me that things like the FBI talking about the Wuhan lab leak theory and confirming that as the origins of the virus is just convenient timing to give us.
Well, that's scary because in order to mobilize the people to fight and to go to war, you have to demonize your adversary.
That's exactly what I was getting at. Is
yeah.
that's important leverage for our administration to justify an escalation of tension and conflict with China, which is why I call this an emerging global conflict, because at this point it feels like the train is going down the tracks. We've got reports of gun manufacturers or munitions manufacturers in the U.S. Dramatically increasing their output. We've got Volodymyr Zelensky talking about, if the U.S. doesn't continue to support and it falls to Russia, that the U.S. will be sending its sons and daughters into war. And I put the Reuters fact check, quote unquote, there on the screen just to be fair to the 19-second clip that was, kind of revolving around the internet. Context is important as we try to ensure that we provide adequate context on the stream, but it feels as though the support for this conflict is waning. It was never really there to begin with, Norm. It felt arbitraged, if I use that term correctly this time for you, and it seems to be waning in great measure. And with the 2024 presidential election now on the horizon, I think now more than ever, things like CPAC are important for the conservative movement to begin to solidify itself along the lines of what Trump promised in his first term, which is, domestic manufacturing, more equalized trade, or trade that favors us right? A civic sense of nationalism, and improving sort of that domestic and cultural fabric that just seems to be torn to shreds.
Well, let me try a slightly different prism on this. And Mike and I are talking a little bit beyond our pay grade. We're just lawyers now talking international affairs. But I guess one of the promises of democratic citizenship is that all issues are accessible to each of us, and in a transparent world, we the people get to decide where we the people are going to go next. And so here are just a couple guys talking around the water cooler.
Well, isn't that fair though, Norm? I mean, we've sent $100 billion plus to Ukraine of U.S. taxpayers. You don't have to. You don't have to be, a foreign policy expert to.
Well, but let's talk about experts. Let's talk about experts. Let's talk about emerging global norms. Let's talk about the neoliberal world order, and let's talk about globalism. Because at the perimeter of this conflict, or whatever is emerging between Ukraine, China, and the United States, these concepts are at play. And so, there are those who say that really what is at issue in Ukraine and the Ukraine-Russian conflict is the world order, meaning how are we going to distribute goods and services, what norms will reflect international and affect international relations and intranational behavior. And so there is, in the eyes of populists like Alex Jones, there's a global elite that is trying to impose something like world government on everyone. And, when you hear those words, it's like, oh, world government, I don't want that. What about American sovereignty? But, you recognize the fact that there is an external world out there that can, independent of your wishes and desires, and that world can be known. And in order for 8 billion people to coexist with some degree of peace in the world, we need norms. We need the rule of law. We need international relations to operate. We need treaties. We need compacts. We need the ability collectively to respond to collective threats like the next pandemic or like climate change and so forth. And so there is a powerful movement for world government, for global governance, for the World Economic Forum.
May I just interject, though? I don't want to gloss over the fact that we're not of one mind on either of the two issues you just enumerated, right? The next global pandemic or climate change. I mean, there's a plurality of opinion on these things.
True.
And so it's difficult for me as a 33-year-old, almost 33-year-old, married father, running a business, running a law practice, doing these things with, trying to maintain, my roots and sense of balance and also optimism for the future. It's difficult for me to resolve that we should be preoccupied with unifying the world under some sort of common norms.
I personally don't like it myself, but this yields the next problem of experts. Who gets to decide what we have to decide? In other words, who sets the agenda? And so you see a lot of discussion, a critique of populists as being anti-expertise. And I think it's not, I don't think anybody's really against experts, but I think people are against being told what their agenda should be. And so with respect to climate change and the World Health Organization and so forth, there are scientific elites who have a perspective on how the world should best be managed or how the world can best manage the challenges they perceive. And in order to address them, they need top-down governance structures, and hence this business about world government or global economic elites. And the fear, at least from the populist perspective, of a dystopia where everybody's happy because we've yielded control to the algorithm that understands it all, but we've lost a sense of significance or efficacy in our own lives. And I hate to make everything sound like it's about St. Augustine, but hence the significance of the notion of original sin, that somehow we are in a world that we can only imperfectly understand, and that our aspirations to control it and to master it are perhaps a form of pride and certainly a struggle for power between people. But yet, Mike, this is where the moment is fraught, because in our individual lives, we each trust experts. If I get sick enough, I'll go to the doctor. If I need something repaired, I'll take it to somebody who knows how it's made. And so I'm not against experts in general, but I'm against authoritarian structures that seek to impose a vision of common good on me. And yet, at the very moment I say that, I recognize that there are better answers, better ways of recognizing problems, better and worse ones, and that many people have better perspectives than mine. And so I become sort of a nutcase when
Norm,
I'm not gonna be spoon fed somebody's vision of the good.
Yeah, that's right. And I was going to say, many people may have better visions of this than you, but many people do not. I read a statistic the other day that is, 1 in 4 people in California are functionally illiterate.
Huh?
Or 1 in 4 Californians can't read.
Well, no, that can't be true.
And I'm just all I'm saying is that it's easy for one to feel a general sense of insignificance in and among the larger group, but that is the basis of our Republican governance, is that the individual is sovereign, right? And that one should be able to earn a larger voice. And I say earn very specifically. What we've seen over the last several years is that the institutions that we would typically delegate and outsource our trust for major medical decisions, major geopolitical decisions, major law enforcement decisions have all failed pretty tremendously in real time. I think about Jon Stewart talking about the lab leak theory, a year ago, 18 months ago, joking about it, getting lambasted thereafter. Now we've got the FBI director, Christopher Wray, talking about, how legitimate of a theory that is. It's just really interesting. And I think it goes back to my theory of sort of the timing, right? It's almost like we're in some sort of weird time travel loop where those in control have discovered some sort of technology where they're able to just port back and forth on some sort of weird timeline and just change things when it's time to change them. But, when it comes to this administration, I said this before, the use of executive authority, the overuse of executive authority is undermining the integrity of that office. And really it's because many people see the wrongs as they come down, but our remedy is through the courts, and their action is immediate, right? And so that delay in justice, that delay in undoing the wrong is really what's tearing the fabric of our republic apart right now.
Well, it's an interesting perspective. These are big thoughts. I don't think we expected to tumble into this today. I'm sort of left agog looking at the world, wondering how it is that we're going to make a sense of community of it, because I think we need it, at least on an individual and a local level, whether it can, and there was discussion, Montesquieu was famous for this, that in talking about the geosocial and environmental factors that supported a political entity, and he wondered whether it was possible to have geographic limits on an effective republic, whether an entity could be too big to be self-governed in a democratic way. And I think he might be right.
Is it I think you're too rich.
Well, let's just focus on bigness for the moment, because we're running out of time today. I mean, what's that notion that you can know 150 people or something like that?
300 maybe the number, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And so, those are people of whom you can develop a sense of knowing and being known, and a sense of inchoate trust upon seeing them, because they're members of your community. The community ties really don't extend across the globe, across the country, even across your state, and much less to include this neoliberal global sense of norms. And if what we're going to do in order to govern ourselves is insist on everything we have in common, we're going to be insisting on perishingly little, and leaving and perishingly little, and the ties may be too attenuated to be meaningful. So could it be that what we see in our time is a reaction against globalism, against the neoliberal world order, against efficiency? And are we adopting or embracing what Philip Roth once referred to as the human stain? That Augustinian sense that we are all pots in seeking to be filled, or as Vivek Ramaswamy put it, we're looking for significance, and you're not going to get it through junk food. You're only going to get it through acts of grace.
Right. Moral hunger cannot be satisfied with fast food.
Well, I don't know. So today we've posed more questions than answers for you, which is the plight of humble.
Well, let's introduce this for tomorrow, Norm. I put it on the screen here. This is an idea I shared with Pete Atkinson originally when he and I connected on the phone one night. And this is a very serious vision. I think about my time in law school and the study group that I formed One of those members of the study group is now my law partner and my best friend. And how important it was for the five of us to really get at the issues and the doctrinal courses with serious rigor and hold each other accountable. I also thought about the serious lack of available external resources for law students that may not really know what to expect, or whether their innate feelings or sense of things are okay because of the way the culture has shifted in law schools. So I think, Norm, you and I last night were volleying this back and forth. Would love to figure out a way to get Law and Legitimacy in the minds and hearts of maybe one study group on every law school campus in the United States. What do you think?
It's an interesting idea. I've spent the last 3 years tutoring somebody through a large law school, and I've got a pretty good perspective on what's going on there. And, he's found it of interest to meet with me, usually on Sunday afternoons for an hour or so, to talk about what's going on in his classes and to provide him with an additional perspective on the emerging doctrines and trends in the law. So let's talk about it tomorrow. Let's kick it around some. It sounds like fun. And it sounds like something you and I both know a little bit about, as opposed to China and international relations. But that's assuming that I survived day 42 of United States of America versus Joseph Biggs. And I'm going to head over to court in a couple minutes. And let me just practice here, Mike. Get ready. Get your robe on. Objection.
Overruled, counselor. Sit down. Don't cry. No crying. No crying.
All right.
No crying.
Thanks, folks, for tuning in. We've talked through another half an hour of your lives. Thanks for sharing it with us. Share us with your friends. We are looking to build and grow this platform. Why? Well, because we can and because we care, and you do too. That's why you're listening. Give us a thumbs up. Listen to us where you can. Thanks again. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yep. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Audible. Share with your friends and family, and most importantly, subscribe to this and urge your family and your supporters and your family, whomever, to support us on Locals. We are trying to build that subscriber base and invest in some additional content that would be exclusive to you over at Locals. So please go over there, become a member, and share those posts.
Ciao.
We'll see you tomorrow, Norm.
I hope so.